Alright, to all you people who are looking for a new opening that is a response to the two knights defense, well, I've got something for you. Instead of playing the normal c3 move here, planning on playing d4, that kinda gets boring and old. There is possibly a better move that you may like. b4. This is the Evans Gambit. So the Evans Gambit is basically the same idea. You still want to play d4, right, and gain control of the center. However, this is more aggressive, and we're going to actually start out by looking at the Evans Gambit declined. So the best way to decline the Gambit for black is bishop to b6. Usually, though, you'll see black accept the Gambit. It's not that bad of a Gambit. But there are a lot of crunch positions, which are positions where you really have to decide which way you want the game to go. If you don't like those kind of positions, don't play a Gambit, especially this one, because there are a lot of decisions to be made in this Gambit. So if they decline, at first it looks like, well, b5 might be an interesting option, right? Well, it's not the best option because after knight to a5, you take the pawn, knight to h6, d4, d6, bishop takes, g takes, knight takes f7, queen to f6, knight takes h8, and knight takes c4 castle. It does work, however, white becomes committed to an unsound piece sacrifice, so white normally prefers more positional treatment. So the idea is to gain space on the queen side by attacking this black bishop and the knight with the pawn as they advance. So that's one option. There are a lot of ideas about people playing other things, such as a4. So let's actually take a look at a4. So this is interesting, and it actually comes back to a6. And then knight to c3, because what's the point of pushing the pawn when he's just going to move back? Instead, you face knight to c3 and then knight to f6. So then you have knight to d5, and after that, black has to be careful. Something as simple as taking this hanging pawn here will result in castling, and then there are a lot of other options, such as the knight coming back, and then bishop to b3, obviously wanting to keep the bishop, e4, and d3. So this move, very, very interesting. I like this, because if black accepts white's piece sacrifice, rook to e1 check, king to f8, knight takes b6, pawn takes, look at this bishop. This bishop is not doing anything. If it wants to come out this way, it's going to take at least 2 moves to move this pawn. Probably 3. To move this pawn to get the bishop out, it's going to take at least 2 moves. Maybe 3. So this bishop is pretty much worth 0 points. So there's compensation right there. Plus, white has control of the board. Way better than black does. So take, bishop to b2. This is standard, and it creates very strong threats. For example, if black decides to take this free pawn, bishop to a3, a5, c3, the knight is 1 back right away. So let's say he doesn't do that, and he just plays queen out to g5. Well, queen takes f3, and now white still has a pretty good game. So what if this piece sacrifice is just declined? Well, castle's kingside. Seems to be the best option. Bishop to g5, queen to e8, and then knight to f6 check. Having to take, otherwise the queen is lost. Bishop takes f6. You can see the king is being hunted down. White plans on playing the move knight to g5 next. So h6 to stop that. However, knight to g5 still works. So knight to g5, bishop now to d4. Black is getting desperate to try to stop this attack. Queen to h5, knight to f5, queen to g6, and checkmate is inevitable for black. So black cannot afford to be too ambitious here. Alright, moving back down here, he has to play in this position knight takes d5. It's really the only move here at this point. And then after e takes d, knight to d4. And this is when, let's say castle, knight takes, and then queen takes. So d6, and white really has nothing in this position. His bishop is blocked in by this pawn. This bishop's going to be blocked in if it comes out here by these two pawns. It can't really come out here and do much right now. So really, white doesn't have anything that's really big. So let's take a look at yet another line here. So what if instead of moving back, black decides to accept this sacrifice of a pawn? Well, now c3. The common move here, obviously, everyone saw it coming. d4 is coming, queen to b3 is coming, and this bishop now has to move. So it's the same thing as a lot of other openings. However, the key is this bishop has to move and white gains a tempo to do it. So the standard move is bishop to a5, but first let's look at the other options. Why not bishop to c5? Well, d4, e takes d4, castles d6, c takes d4, bishop back to b6, and d5. This is pretty good for white, and it's actually called the normal position when you get this in with d4. So that's called the normal position. So at this point, instead of taking the pawn, we already determined that that's not the best. What about knight to a5, trying to get the bishop out of there? Well, knight takes e5, so now the knight takes this bishop, knight comes back, d6, and you can see the play as followed. Pretty good for white, who's now going to get this massive center. He's going to get a lot of play, easy development. These knights are just going to roll around, and you can see these pawns. They just look super threatening. Alright, so what else is there to really talk about then? Well, what if, we already saw this line, so what if at this point, after d4, d6 is played? Well, there are a few options. Take, knight takes, d takes, queen to h5, g6, queen takes the pawn, so white just won his pawn back, knight to f6, obviously, and then bishop to a3. So this is actually a key in the Evans Gambit to bring the bishop out either to b2 or a3 to attack the king side. So you're going to get some really nice compensation for this. So let's back up a few moves now and actually look at what if not d6? What about knight to f6, just attacking this e4 pawn? So now there's d takes, knight to g4, not taking back this pawn, instead trying to take back this e5 pawn here. Queen to d5, castles, h3, and now white has a pretty good game. So another option here to defend was bishop to f6. That actually happened in a game, and if you want to see that, there's that, d6, very key move here. And again, white is going to follow up with either queen to b3, or he's going to come up here and take if the pawn takes. So that's rather interesting there. Alright, let's go back now a few moves. So we kind of decided that this bishop to c5, it was okay. Let's talk about bishop to e7. So bishop to e7 is yet another option. So, after that, queen to b3. So now the queen's going to come out, obviously attacking this pawn. So, also d4. d4 is the one. We're going to get back to queen to b3 in just a little bit. d4 is a good move still, and it can still be defended same way as we saw before. So there's that again. But let's get back to queen to b3. So d4 in this position, and we're going to get to queen to b3, don't worry. Right now, let's go to that. The bishop goes to a5. The common move, it's really the best move to keep the initiative for black. because it's going to pin down this c pawn if the d pawn moves. So queen to b3 is actually a really strong move, and there are things to do. First, let's look at queen to f6. Seems to be a great move, and castle, bishop to b6, d4, d6, d takes, take, and a4. This is a very common move as well, as I already told you about back when we still had the b pawn in the declined variation. A4 is still a common move in every line that you're going to see, because you want to get that bishop out of its comfortable place, right? This is where the bishop wants to be. You don't want it to be there. A6, though, is played, and that's the end of that line. So, queen to b3, you gotta defend this pawn somehow. Queen to e7 looks as good as any other move, right? Well, d4, e takes, and it's pretty much the same type of thing, except for now you've got to watch out for this pawn, and you've also got this pawn that you've got to hold down. So black actually has a lot of threats. And the other version of defending is knight to h6. d4, and obviously the bishop is going to take the knight coming up. So got to do something such as castle, and he loses the knight. So that's a line there. So back to the d4, e takes d4. So obviously we already talked about the option of d6, queen out, knight takes. But let's look at it now if you play queen to b3 at this point instead of later. So here, now the knight can come out, take this pawn because of the pin on the pawn of c3. So knight takes, take, bishop takes f7, check, king to f8. Whoops, did I just skip ahead? King to f8, castles, queen to f6, queen to a4, king takes f7, and queen takes a5, so winning right back the piece. Take, queen takes, taking the pawn back. Here, taking his pawn back again. And now the bishop's coming out. Some dangerous discoveries could occur. The rook comes out, taking back yet another pawn. Rook comes out again. Queen just safely goes back all the way to a3, and it's threatening this pawn. So black has a decent game here, but you can still see that white has a lot of space. White's gonna bring out the rooks. He has this bishop that could potentially be dangerous. So black has to watch out because there are a lot of tricks. Let's not talk about taking. That move's kind of risky. Queen to e7, though, seems to fare well with a lot of people. So there is the push, and you can see these lines here. Win the bishop, and then give up the rook. And you'll see what happens. White is going to get a rather nice attack. Again, bishop to a3, key move in the Evans Gambit. Now he gives up the knight. So what is white doing? Well, take. This pawn is pinned. He's going to take the rook. He's going to be happy. And now white takes the queen, bishop to c2, and now you can see that white actually has a lot of compensation for this piece, and there is his rook back. I'm going to take his rook back, check here, and there is really no hope at this point. There's going to be checkmate, or something bad that happens to black. Well, actually, it's a checkmate, so that's bad enough. So there's that variation. So let's now go back, and then queen to b3 after the take is actually the main line, because you can always take this back with the knight later, correct? Of course. So, and you've also got this threat on f7. It's just a little delayed in the game. Another variation, the more passive version, is castling, and then knight to g7, but this seems to be decent enough for black. Alright, queen to b3 though. That is the big line that a lot of people would play. So this is the common position in the Evans Gambit right here with queen to b3. That was a key move, bringing out the bishop either to b2 or a3 depending on the position of the game. That is a key concept here. d4, another key concept for white. So if you're going to play this as white, you have to be thinking of these crunch positions. What are you going to play? And those are really the basic concepts. So let's actually now take a look at the game here. we're just going to quickly take a little overview of a real game. So you have d4 and then d6. So this is rather standard, and queen to b3, obviously. So again, you will have noticed that this move is usually played fairly early in attacking lines. And it's actually probably the best move in the Evans Gambit, because black's f-pawn is under attack, and he must decide how to meet the threat. So now black faces the crunch position, right? He has to somehow defend this. Well, queen to d7. A very nice way of defense. So he could again play knight to h6. It's an interesting move, however, it should lose to bishop takes. Here, g takes, bishop takes, check, king to f8, and then d takes here. So eventually you can see how white should have a nice advantage. Alright, so moving back, queen to d7 was the chosen line, and then take on e5. Black is going to recapture with the pawn. The other capture with the knight does not look as good, especially after knight takes, d takes. Now the bishop can take f7, right? Because if the queen takes, let's say, queen to b5 check, bishop to d7, queen takes a5, threatening here now and here, queen to f6 defending the e5 pawn, and now queen takes up here, knight to e7, and castles. And this is pretty good for white again. You can see he has this threat right now on b7. He has king is nice and castled. This king is not castled yet. His bishop is going to have rather easy development, just going to a3. His knight's going to come out via d2, and pretty good line. So that's why we did not do the knight capture, right? We did the pawn capture. So after now d takes, again, a4. Oops, sorry, I missed something. Castles. Then bishop to b6, pinning down this f-pawn, rook to d1, attacking the queen, queen to e7, and now a4. So the point of a4 is to get the bishop out of the way, right? We already talked about that, especially when it's here, pinning down the f-pawn. This f-pawn could be important later. White does not like this pin. He also does not like how the bishop is controlling this diagonal. So a4. Other moves are rarely played in this situation in master level tournaments, and this actually is given excellent results. It sometimes can claim equality for black, but it's really powerful for white. So there are several possibilities here. There's knight to a5, and just take the pawn again. Of course, queen takes f7, and then rook to d8 check, king to e7, and you can already see how black is about to fall in to a trap of losing a rook. So that's an important line that you might want to note. Black thinks he's going to grab white's bishop at the very least. He doesn't, though. What else is there? There is bishop to e6. That could be a possible stopping line. However, a5 is pretty good. And then bishop takes c4, obviously. Queen takes c4. So what if now the knight takes? Here. So this kind of looks like the same sort of thing, correct? Well, it's not. The rook is going to take. Then the bishop's going to take. And then queen a4 check wins 2 pieces for a rook. Alright, so moving back. Let's not do that move now. And now let's stick with knight to h6. This was the move that was actually played in the game. So this move is decent. It's a lot better. It defends the pawn a lot better than the other moves. And now, after knight to h6, a5 again. So once again, you're doing the move, trying to get the bishop out of there. The bishop moves back to c5, and now a6. Big move right here. If he decided not to do that, this pawn would have been kind of under attack the rest of the game. Also, you'll see in just 1 second why this move was much better. So queen here, he's going to try to get the queen back on this rank. Bishop now is going to go to b5. And he is going to try, so if obviously if the pawn would have been taken, this bishop coming to b5 would have been more powerful. And it's still powerful because he has the threat of taking and then taking again, right? So now the bishop moves to d7, c4. And this has excellent attacking chances for white. So that's pretty much the Evans Gambit. Very, very powerful opening. It is very widely used as a reply to the two knights game, actually. So this is very aggressive, as you can see in all of these games. And again, if you're going to remember anything from this video, queen to b3 with the bishop on c4, that is a very, very powerful battery. Alright, remember that. Bishop coming out to b2, or most likely a3. Very, very common strategy. Depends on the position. Also, the bishop moving to g5. Very powerful if it has to attack the queen in any way. Also, this knight. Remember, if he plays the knight, bishop takes is usually always the answer. Also, the files, the E and the D file, one of those files is going to open up. Usually it's the D file. Also, the A pawn. The A pawn has a purpose in this opening. That purpose is to be pushed. So pushing the pawn, sometimes it goes all the way to A5, sometimes it doesn't. That depends, but that is another key. Also, a key is don't let the white or the black king castle. If the black king stays in the center, obviously you've got a better game, and usually bishop to a3 stops the castling chances for black. And as you can see here, he has to castle queenside where the attack is located. So those are some tips for the Evans Gambit. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this video helps. Hope it gives you an idea of a possible opening that you can play. Practice this opening. See if you like it. If you don't like it, well, you don't have to use it. But if you do like it, well, hey, you just got something new that you might enjoy. Have fun beating people with it. Thanks for watching.